I'm Brian Steffens with the Reynolds Journalism Institute, and we've heard about all the areas that are of interest to academics, to researchers, to some of the vendors, and a number of others. But the one place we really haven't focused on all day is the folks that have the content that you're all arguing about. And so we want to address that here at the final piece of this. To my left, your right, is Mizell Stewart. You can read his bio in the book, of course. I've known him for quite a few years. He's worked at almost as many newspaper companies as I have. I first met him with Cox, and he went off to Tallahassee, and then now he's back at Scripps Howard, which is actually doing some pretty interesting stuff. And one of the things about Mizell is he likes to be where the action is, and so he's been focused on a lot of digital initiatives in the last few years, and should have some perspective on this because his company is working on this very issue. Next to him is Christopher, and he started in this business about 14 years ago, I found out last night talking with him, and he's been digital for 12. And unlike perhaps ProQuest or LexisNexis, you may know, started out from Meade Corporation, big, deep pockets. His company started in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and from my perspective, bootstrapped itself up. I mean, it's probably a little better than that, but he's built quite a viable business working with a lot of newspapers and has branched out into other continents. And then next to him is Randy, and he comes from the Tribune. He has worked in almost every editorial capacity in the newsroom, so he understands the content as well as anybody, I believe, which puts him in a great position for this discussion. Because in his current position in administration in the newsroom, the archives of the Chicago Tribune fall under his purview. Now, I won't say the Chicago Tribune, whatever they do goes to all other Tribune papers, but there's a good chance that whatever he discovers and learns in trial and error may find itself happening in Orlando or elsewhere. But having just come from a meeting where I met with some of the other Tribune editors last week, I know that there's a little bit of in-house competition, so from Los Angeles and elsewhere, so it'll be interesting to find his perspective. I just want to make a comment or two, and then we'll start off. In this last session, it was very interesting. We said, well, why don't we have a national copyright clearinghouse of some sort that works like it might in another country? Finland has, within legislation, something that more or less mandates that. Well, in this democracy, we would have to get our legislature, the Congress, to do something like that. Somewhat different than Finland, I want to remind you of something. At the turn of this century, 2000, there were 9,000 newspapers in America, over 1,000 dailies, but over 8,000 weeklies. Now, you've heard the expression herding cats. Well, I found somebody this last year that changed that for me. He said, dealing with newspaper publishers, owners, not editors, it's not like herding cats, it's like herding quail. Give that a little thought for a minute. Trying to get them to go in any one direction and agree to anything, not so. Also remember, this is the country of the Revolutionary War and the Wild West. It's extremely competitive. Nobody wants to play on the same field as the guy next to him. It's just the way it's been. I think that's changing in this decade under economic duress. I didn't think I'd live to see the day where the Tribune Company and McClatchy and Gannett would all work together, but they did in Career Builder and Tribune Ventures and some other online digital assets. But up until 1990, those guys wouldn't talk to each other. Just didn't happen. So I want to throw that in there that it is a changing marketplace for us. But one of the things I wanted to find out is it mentioned very first thing this morning, it said these initiatives are only as valuable as they are utilized. And I'd be curious to find out from each of these gentlemen, how do they see or do they know how these archives are being used? Now, for Mizell's and Randy's, it'd be their individual paper, but I'm hoping Chris, since he has like 5,000 papers in his database or whatever, hopefully his customers maybe share some of that, because part of the situation is if you're talking about community and citizens, those tend to be one-offs. But a lot of the people in this room are interested in libraries and academic research and commercial enterprise. And I'm wondering, how big is the market for the one-off, the citizen versus the corporation? I'll start with Mizell, and we'll go down. And then after that, I'd like to give Mizell a chance to do a brief presentation.
Well, I think the market is there, and we see it in our community. I mean, the market is there for in terms of the individual citizen who's curious about something that has happened, whether it's genealogical research, whether it is just plain curiosity. And you have generations. It's not necessarily people in the local market. It's also people who have left the market. But newspaper archives historically are not accessible. I am Mizell Stewart III. That means there were two more before me. My grandfather was in Youngstown, Ohio, and was a relatively prominent citizen. And I wanted to find out more about him. The only place I could go was the newspaper archive. And getting through the gauntlet of people to actually get permission to go in as an actual person to a newspaper archive was pretty interesting. I had to pull out the professional courtesy card just to get in the door, and so I think there's if that's a small indication, I think that the market is robust, but we have to make them accessible.
Chris, what can you see?
Well, we went online in December of 1999, and my background is microfilming newspapers, and we still today microfilm 800,000 pages a month. But I started the archive in 1999 expecting that people wanted news from newspapers. And from newspaper archives, they don't. They want people. And the search stream is me, grandma, dad, grandma, grandpa, great uncle, great aunt. And it's not news. And as recently as this weekend, I reviewed the top 100 searches on our site. We get 800,000 visitors a month to newspaperarchive.com. We get more in a day than the British Library at Collindale gets in a year. So I guess I do think I can speak about what people search for in a newspaper archive, and it's just people. It's not news. Now, that aside, then of course, we have many researchers in many libraries. We serve 500 institutions, including 3 states, with access to every terminal in their state. So certainly hardcore researchers do access our archive. But in the top 100 searches, it's people looking for people, and usually they're relatives. We have 115 million pages online, more than 5,000 titles, every state, 10 countries. This year we'll add 20 more countries to our country list, starting Wednesday. We'll be down there and scanning. We do all of our production now offshore, near shore. So I guess the answer is that for our newspaper archive, which is big and well used, the average researcher is, I was chatting with the gentleman here from Family Search, and same user, female 55 to 65, searching from home, some college, and is most likely using us for genealogical research, so that's number one. So I'm glad to say that running a newspaper archive is a profitable business, good for me, good for, we have 800 newspapers under contract with the publishers, good for them, lots of royalties. Some days I think it's just work for them. I want to touch on the copyright issue for a moment, if I could. I think, I'm sorry to say, I'm probably in a practical matter one of the most experienced newspaper copyright people in the United States. I get a letter from a very excited lawyer about once a quarter. And that excitement's not always good, but I'm happy to say we've never been successfully sued by anybody. I'm also happy to say I don't have any outstanding obligations in that regard right now. I think there's a lot of misinformation. It is complicated. We do our very best to not step on anybody's copyrights, and that's, of course, gone a long ways to me never having a problem in that regard. So, to answer the question, I guess, put to me by Brian, newspaper archives are very well used and can be a very good business for a lot of people.
I think I would echo Mizell as far as what it's used for, and Christopher as well, because most of the personal searches that we get are related to people, and they're not, though, the distant archives. As Mizell points out, you can't get into those very easily. And the Tribune Company as a whole and its individual newspapers hold those rights very tightly. We recognize the necessity and the desire to be part of a greater community and a good citizen, but I think newspapers have learned a lot from the Internet, namely don't give anything away because it'll eat your lunch later. We will not give anything away. And to answer Bernie, if Harvard stole my copyright, they would get sued. I mean, it's not even a question, and we don't treat that very lightly at all. I probably send out an initial letter every other week to somebody saying, take our content down, you don't have the right to use it, whether it's archival or current. It's mine. Without my permission, you do not get to use it. And that runs through my office. If I don't get a response within a week, it's followed by one of those excited letters from a lawyer. And generally, that does get a response. So that's a very valuable thing. And Joe Haidt, I thought, made very interesting comment that most publishers are starting to realize that in their archives is probably their second most valuable asset after their people. Photos especially. The Tribune has made a couple of contracts, and we're working and trying to figure out ways to monetize those archives. And yeah, it's unfortunate that some of the hard copies get sold from a historical perspective, but the Tribune is very conscious of maintaining the rights to those photos, to publish them and to use them, and to allow research in them. That isn't the issue. The issue is what is that hard copy worth? And if a collector wants to pay us for it, that will help digitize those assets so that the researchers will get a chance to use them. Because I can guarantee you one other thing, and that is the number of people who will get into the actual hard copy photo libraries of the Tribune or the LA Times, probably I can count on the fingers of one hand. And for one very simple reason. They either disappear, they get destroyed. Now, if it's not a trained librarian, there's too much risk. And we won't do it.
Well, this offers a follow-up question for me. After the Cini ruling, it took a number of organizations months, if not longer, to actually come up with the new contracts for the freelance writers. Did you have to deal with that freelance material pre-Cini? Did you have to go in and do redaction, either on the database side or on the content provider side, and how difficult or costly was that?
Well, at the time that ruling came down, I was actually with a different newspaper company, Knight Ridder, which also no longer exists. It's a pattern I have, I guess. But at that time, it was a matter of scouring the archive and identifying, did we have particular freelancers who were under contract. And with a digital archive, that's fairly easy because you can pull them out using a byline search. I mean, nothing really went further than that. Digitizing backwards, was that an issue or not? Not pre-ASCII.
Okay. Did you run into that at all, Chris, with your database?
No, we didn't. Prior to that, we were more cautious, I think, than some of the other parties in that suit. And we present the newspaper as it originally ran in its entirety. And Tassini was careful in that, the Supreme Court in that decision to continue to allow that. So we did not have any issues.
Any issue with you, Randy?
Well, we had it on two levels. I mean, we worked with ProQuest, for example, and the same ruling, as you point out, you can use the newspaper as a whole. What you can't do is extract the individual article. So what we did was, in the ProQuest search, if you go in and search for Joe Smith's freelance article, you'll see it on the page. But you cannot pull it out of there. You cannot use it for anything, and anything that's within our digital archive is marked as such, as not usable.
Okay.
And that applies to both photography and text search.
All right. I'd like to take a quick break here at this point and let Mizell run through his slides, which will probably prompt some more conversation.
Well, and I wanted to share a few things because Martha this morning in her opening presentation referenced the Rocky Mountain News, which was in an E.W. Scripps paper, and I represent E.W. Scripps. You talked about herding quail, Brian. It's the same thing in trying to get a bunch of editors to agree on the same direction, and we've really seen this as it relates to the archive space. But I want to talk for a couple minutes about archives access and revenue, because as Randy points out, archives are an asset to a local media organization, and we see them as a key asset as we look to this future where advertising has been decoupled from content, and advertising historically has paid for original content creation. So I want to share with you a couple of different examples, one local and one Denver. The Evansville Press was a precursor to my newspaper, the Evansville Courier and Press. It ceased publication December 31st, 1998. And the Evansville Press archives...
It says, go pick up my daughter.
All right. I mean, I knew that my archives were a mess, but when the press ceased publication, the Evansville Courier and the Evansville Press were a joint operating agreement situation. The Evansville Press was owned by E.W. Scripps. The Evansville Courier was locally owned. What Scripps did in 1998 was to purchase the Evansville Courier, combine, which was the morning paper, and then combine the two nameplates into the Evansville Courier and Press, and then shut down the afternoon paper. And so when the press was closed, Scripps donated the archives to two libraries in Evansville. The text archives went to the Evansville Vandenberg Public Library, and the photographic archives went to the Willard Library. They're two independent systems in the same city, but Willard is really known around the country for its genealogical collections. And again, the idea was to make sure that the archives live on beyond the newspaper nameplate. And so the Evansville Press archives are in the process of being digitized. And what you see here is a screenshot of the Evansville Local History Database, which includes the individual articles, individual clippings from the Evansville Press. And the archivist will, as they're scanning that article in, will include metadata and search terms and so forth. And the digital image, what you see there is a digital image of one of the articles in the archive. I mentioned that the photo archive went to Willard Library, and this is a partial shot of Willard's homepage, and there's a search function that will allow you to go into the photo archives of the Evansville Press. And so we see this image of, I believe, the 1954 Miss Evansville pageant. And this has been repeated over and over again as Scripps has ceased publication of newspapers. The Albuquerque newspaper was mentioned earlier, and then, of course, there was the Rocky Mountain News, which we'll get to in a second. But here's the challenge with these pieced archives, that right now, today, 20% of those individual articles clipped out of the Evansville Press and painstakingly filed by librarians are in the digital archive. So that means 80% has yet to be archived, and they in a digital form. And the libraries do it when they have time and resources available. And again, the issue here is the expense and the speed of digitization. There is a cost no matter what, but the reason there's only 20% there is because they do it as they have time. Talk a couple minutes about Denver. In 2009, the Rocky Mountain News closed. This was the scene in the newsroom as Rich Bainey, the CEO of E.W. Scripps, and Mark Contreras, the president of the newspaper, vice president of the newspaper division, announced the closing. And their front page on the last day, Goodbye Colorado. And there was a quote in this story that I thought was particularly applicable to the discussion we're having today. They say, "Our time chronicling the life of Denver and Colorado, the nation and the world is over. All that will be left are the stories we have told, captured on microfilm or in digital archives, devices unimaginable in those first days." And so once again, in keeping with our tradition to allow the archives to live on in the community, Scripps began negotiations with the Denver Public Library and the Denver Historical Society for the archives and other artifacts that were part of the Rocky Mountain News, and those negotiations are still ongoing. But here's the challenge that newspaper companies face right now. That for every dollar of advertising that used to be gained in a newspaper in a print form really turns to a dime in the digital era. And so what we're looking at is remaking the business model to support local original content creation, new business model for local watchdog journalism. So content providers have a series of choices. It can either reduce expenses to match revenue, and boy, haven't we seen that all around the country, or also to create more value from content. And archives are a key part of that strategy to create more value. Newspapers typically had 3 buckets of revenue: display advertising, classified advertising, and subscription revenue. Well, display advertising, we've seen what's happened. Newspapers have contracted. The classified business has virtually gone away. That leaves us with circulation revenue, and so we've seen a lot of price increases at newspapers over the past several years. Our future is figuring out ways to add more buckets of revenue, and however many we can come up with. And the difficult part in that is, we see people now who are literally going to newspapers who are desperate for cash and saying, we will buy your photo archives. We'll give you the rights to use those archives in a digital form, but we'll take them, we'll scan them, and Joe mentioned that in reference to the Oklahoman. And one of my colleagues in Scripps, again herding quail, was so proud to tell me that, hey, we're about to negotiate a deal for our picture archives. And I'm going, oh my God, don't do that just yet. Please hold on to that. So we're in a challenging time right now because, again, you have newspaper companies that are seeking all kinds of sources of revenue and not necessarily looking at the future. But we're working to make sure that we do not sacrifice the community interest for the sake of a one-time financial gain. And the reason is because we're there to serve the community. I think the value of the legacy media organization, I don't call us newspapers anymore, but the legacy media organization, as it evolves into the digital world, a big part of our brand is that community service, and so we've got to figure out ways to do that. And because of that, our archives are a strategic asset. They're not just something that we can sell off for a quick dollar. But somehow, we've got to figure out how to sustain the journalists who create content now and into the future. And so we've come up with some issues to consider in the content creation side and how local media organizations and others can work together. Please remember that the whole process of creation, curation, annotating, and archiving is not free. And we have to figure out how do we recover those costs. When you look at the 20% of the Evansville Press archives that are now in digital format, the reason that it's only 20% is because of the work that needs to take place in terms of scanning, archiving, and annotating that information. The library is strapped for cash. I mean, they have the physical archive, but it's not as useful as it would be if that archive was not digitized. But we think that there are win-win revenue models in play. And one of the reasons for the continued conversation in Denver over the Rocky Mountain News Archives is, how do we create a revenue share so that the library sees revenue? The library is going to take on that process of scanning and digitizing. How do we make that available to the community but still create some revenue so that the cost of that scanning can be realized? We're seeing the same thing as it relates to some of our historical archives. Can we create a way for libraries to make a little bit of money, for the newspaper to make a little bit of money, for the private sector to make a little bit of money? again, a win-win revenue model. It's been mentioned that there are other assets at a dark newspaper that are worthy and should be preserved, and that was one of the reasons for the dual donation that is contemplated in Denver for not only the archives but the artifacts and business papers of the Rocky Mountain News. And then this is the area that is untapped. And I think that newspaper editors and publishers in trying to keep the lights on are really not thinking in this area, but it's establishing archives of web-first content. Yes, there is an issue of when do you freeze that snapshot in time, but there is content now because we say that digital has an unlimited news hole. I mean, there are no space limitations to publishing. To digital publishing. And so there is content that's being created by local journalists that never makes its way into print. It's only on the web. We need to have mechanisms in place to archive that. And yes, the times, they're certainly changing, but this is one of my favorite stories. This is a young girl who is looking at her picture in the Evansville Courier Press. What made this so cool was what her mom did with it. She posted that picture on Facebook and said her mom wrote, she loves the pictures I took, but to have her picture in the paper is the bomb. And I just, that's everything. So.
Thank you, Mizell. Randy, what's been your experience in Chicago? I know one of the issues you brought up is one of the opportunities, perhaps. I mean, there are enough challenges. Might be you're working or focusing on the photo archives.
I'm sorry, on
the photo archives?
Yeah, well, we have more than 7 million photos in our archives. In addition to that, we have several thousand glass negatives that are available. We have very, very old copies of the newspaper. I can actually take someone into our archive and show you the newspaper that the Chicago Daily Tribune printed when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. And it's the physical copy of the newspaper, all carefully stored in acid-free, temperature-controlled, humidity-controlled environment. And the idea is that we felt that the photographs were going to be the test market for this, to find out what can we sell. Is there a market for this? We did not want to sell the archive outright, so we actually have a deal with Bob Pokras from Image Fortress, and he's doing the digitization, and then we're selling individual photos. There's a limitation. I don't remember what it is just off the head. Eric Amundsen's here. I can talk to him about that, too, about how long they'll be held. If they aren't sold, we'll get them back. So we are looking at ways, in addition to that, we're looking at other ways that we can deal with how do we monetize all these assets in a way where we retain the rights and the ability at the same time to be a good partner with the city and the state and all the any academic institution that wants to work with us on this. Unfortunately, as has been brought up numerous times, all those research organizations are having the same financial issues that we are. So when I go out and look for somebody who wants to cough up a couple of $100,000, it's not real easy to do. But the general response, again, it depends on the photo. I mean, we sell some photos and they go very well and very quickly, and others kind of languish for a while. And we've had some of the same experience just licensing some of our photos. In Chicago, most of you would figure, what is the single photo of all of the photos that we have, what photo do you think probably has sold more than anything else? And the guess is probably going to be one of the Al Capone photos or something. No. The photo that sells more than anything else, and this tells you where the audience is a picture of a center fielder named Al Smith getting a beer dumped on him in the 1959 World Series. That thing to this day is either the first or second that we get on reports of what we sell in reproduction. This is not the original, but I want the copy of that photo. It's, and you go, why? But that's the photo that everybody wants. And St. Valentine's Day Massacre is there. The Dewey defeats Truman photo, just so you know, we can't sell. That's an AP photo. And I can't sell you the newspaper either, because that's one front page that we don't have, because it wasn't the edition of record. There actually probably somewhere between 10 and 15,000 copies of that newspaper were all that were printed, because it was in the middle of a strike, and we put that thing out and very quickly realized, oops. But in the days of letterpress, you couldn't shut it down and replace it very quickly. So there were about 15,000 that got out. But that was the edition that, in those days, we called it the Midwest edition. It was printed very early and went to Wisconsin and Indiana and downstate. And none of the home delivery copies said that. But that didn't make any difference. The one that Harry Truman got in Independence was... So it's been reasonably successful, though.
I don't feel so bad about Bush versus Gore now.
Yeah, well, I didn't repeat the error.
Well, Christopher, I'd like to ask you, when John Haidt was up here about the Oklahoman, he had special packages, whether it was Geronimo or others. And I noticed on your website you have special subject areas. And are you able to successfully monetize those, or how is that working out?
Not yet. I think that's it's interesting to hear to watch this industry transition from print to online, and it takes a lot of testing, and that's gotten a lot of traffic, but not a lot of pay traffic, and so that's the challenge. One of our challenges.
Have you noticed any trends about what types of content might go in that direction? It's funny when you talk about what people actually want to read about and see about, and it tends to be the actors and the actresses that people are really searching on and looking at, and then baseball is right there, way ahead of football and everything else. Just the baseball guys are really pretty fanatical about it. So that would be my comments: is Babe Ruth and those sports. All right,
history.
I'd like to. Unless you have something else you want to add right away, I'd like to turn over to questions, because we're getting toward the end of the day. And I know when the gentleman in the back was asking about giving it free to the research, nobody would really care. He wasn't nodding in agreement when you answered, so we did that. So we'll open it up. But the guy in front first was here. Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah, you. I'm sorry.
That guy. Patrick Cox. Just in this new model in Mizell, I'm glad you brought all this up, because you heard this morning from our perspective, from the institutional side, the challenges we have, but it's good to bring back in from the industry's perspective. But tell me, in this new model, and this not just for you, anybody else that wants to respond, from the researcher, from the historian side, and also from the educator side of people, that we want to, whether for us for serious academic research or to bring our students in, where do we come in these new models? Are we still going to have unfettered access? Are we still going to be able to go into the photo archives like we can in other institutions? I mean, is this coming into consideration? I'd like to hear y'all's response on that.
Well, I think there are a couple things to keep in mind. I mean, one is that I see a future in which we partner to get the digitization done, and then we go to our local library and say, here's our collection and here's the price. But once that transaction is made, then the library would then take it, and as they do now with any number of data vendors, they buy access to the database, and if you have a library card, you have access to it. And so that's a model, at least in our community. that's worked out pretty well, and that's what we see. That's where we see going forward. Because again, the expense of actually making that happen is going to have to be borne in some fashion. And I'm told that there are any number of foundations and others that are willing to step up and work with the local communities to buy these digital collections for the access of all. Obviously, yes, I'm going to want to have a bucket and monetize those people who are coming at it to my website. But I think there's also a benefit to the community, and we would receive some revenue from the collection. And the other important point to make about a lot of photo archives, and particularly a lot of small newspapers, one of the things that ticks me off every day is that my file of Larry Bird is gone. My file, original photos of Larry Bird, who played his college ball or high school ball in French Lick, right on the other end of the state, and his college ball up in Terre Haute, a couple hours north of Evansville, is gone because somebody literally grabbed it and walked out the door with it. And so these originals are at risk where they're sitting in the newspaper office. And so it's important for us to take some steps now that we're paying attention to it to secure what we have.
Randy, do you want
One other quick thing on making these available to the public. One of the things that's very tricky is the legal issue. Granted, if it's being used just for research, there's probably not a problem. But if the picture of Joe Smith having trouble filling his car with gas is an attractive photo, and someone in the library can get, who has access to it because he's got a library card, says, I can use that as part of an advertising campaign. You've got a legal issue. You don't have the right to use that person's image as part of a commercial venture. You can do it as news coverage. There's no question about that. But you have to be careful as you lead. And what about the 12-year-old girl who's the cheerleader that, we have a rule at the Tribune, for example, we do not let those out unless you can prove you're a parent. There's very much of a concern about pedophilia.
And Randy, let me jump in on that point real quick. One of the things about the photo archives in particular is, you do a low-res archive for the public and watermark them.
Oh, yeah, but it's the legal issues that you have to take beyond just, not only do you have to get them digitized, you have to get them protected. Because, one of the things that drives me nuts is watching prize-winning Chicago Tribune photos end up on somebody's blog. They grab it, they steal it, it's there. I got nothing to do about it. And trying to get them to take it down is next to impossible.
Yet that drives traffic, and he gets advertising off of that if he's on Google AdWords.
Yeah, and we don't.
Back where I promised you.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back to Harvard stealing the intellectual property of the Tribune. Actually, Harvard is paying for access to the Tribune through ProQuest, it's really not that model's not working though with the web. It's good. It's a good model where the Tribune licenses its back issues through ProQuest for digital access to universities and research libraries. And with the web, it's just really not the right model. It's also I don't think it's the research libraries are going to eat the newspaper's lunch. I think there's bigger problems out there. But I think with the web, it's the answer is not going to be to build bigger fences around the content. It is to negotiate the kind of arrangement that Mizell talked about in the analog world, where there's a give and take between the publisher and the preservation agent, whether that's a library or a university or not. And I think it's we need some new models that aren't the same as the way the micro publishing and the facsimile publishing has worked.
I should have been clearer, I suppose. If Harvard were to steal, I wasn't implying that Harvard did. It's just that I think that most publishers are have a pretty strict wall about somebody getting permission to use anything of their copyrighted material. It doesn't matter whether it's Harvard, the city of Chicago, or for that matter, the President of the United States. If it's my copyright, you get my permission. Now, if Barack Obama calls us and wants to use something, I'm probably going to say, sure, just give us credit. But it is our content, and I think that publishers are very, very leery about opening something for free, not cooperating. I mean, if the University of Missouri wants to come to us and say, we'll pay you $500,000 over the next 5 years to get your archives completely digitized, I'm going to listen to them. But I'm not going to give it to them for free.
To you and said, we'll give you $500,000. We'll steer eventually to you $500,000 worth of traffic because we'll have educated every 4 years we'll generate a whole group of users who are now aware of your archive.
I'll give you my business card afterward. You can call me.
Well, could I ask a question because it is related to what Bernie's saying? I've done a lot. I'm at Penn State University and I'm a librarian, and I've looked in great detail at what titles in our newspaper databases, LexisNexis, ProQuest, Newsbank, are being searched. And it's within an academic context. And it's not, there are, searches about people and about actors and actresses and all that kind of thing. But it's a research context. And it's a fairly narrow, I can tell you there are 5 newspapers that are searched the most frequently, and our Pennsylvania newspapers. And what I always wonder is, when you guys talk about, you want us to pay to digitize the stuff, and then you want us to buy it back. That's kind of what you said about the public library. I always feel like we could educate.
No, I didn't say that we want if the library is digitizing.
Yeah.
They have physical possession of the archive, and they're digitizing it. It's on their and it's on their dime. If I digitize it, I'm going to incur that expense, and so I want to recover that.
Well, what I want is, let's see if I can articulate this in two or three sentences clearly. Academic institutions are very good at controlling access to the content that they license. We're very, very good at that, I think. Public libraries are too. And so, in a way, and what we do is at Penn State, we have the potential to educate 45,000 students every year about newspaper content, and to get them into those databases in all sorts of content. And right now, it's my sense that Penn State students don't fully understand why content is out there on the web, but they're being charged for it. I feel like if you would think about libraries and academic institutions as partners in educating a future generations about the role of newspaper content, we would be essentially training your future users to use your archives, because after they leave us, we no longer let them have access to the content that you've licensed to us.
And by all means, I think that if there's a newspaper out there who is not looking for some kind of arrangement that will help them leverage this asset, I would be shocked. No? When did?
Access to content because it's being sold to them, limited to academics.
Well, and I'm saying, come talk to us. We'll figure out what the problem is, and we'll figure out what's going on. We have no desire to limit the access. We want to maximize our return. That's the simplest thing of all.
Let's go right here in the middle.
The real question that I've got, as somebody who manages a newspaper archive, we have got millions of photos, much as the Tribune does. I'm in the Kansas City Star again. However, the provenance on those photos is impossible to determine, I would guess, for at least 70% of that content. I have absolutely no clue who took this beautiful streetscape of Kansas City in 1920, and there are going to be 2 commercial photographers in town who say, I've got that negative, I'm the one who generated that. So I think that a lot of us are being far too sanguine about the possibility of monetizing this stuff. And really, I hope that this doesn't sound like I'm denigrating the academic researchers, because I don't really think they're the biggest part of this. The end user fees that the libraries are generating through the ProQuest and the Nexuses of the world are the ones that really get that academic use out there. We are not concerned about the academics that are archiving our stuff, or that are accessing our archives for fair use reference in scholarly works. What we're talking about here is if we're going to be able to monetize this going forward to make sense in digitizing it. But, I look at my archives, and it's not worth my time to go through those things and pick out those 20 or 30% of photos and then wonder, okay, is the NFL going to come back at me and say, hey, you don't own that because they've certainly done it before, NBL or MLB?
You have the right to sell the hard copy. You have complete right to sell the hard copy. That's why we're doing it. We don't license anything that we don't own. So when it comes back into us, the first thing we check is the source. It says AP on it. Fine, it stays in our archive as a something of record, but I don't try to do anything with that. There are also people, don't try to sell anything that's got Michael Jordan in it. I mean, seriously. It's that kind of thing. You know that those people, you have no right to reuse their image. I have the right to sell the news photo that's from our file. Now I have a digitized copy that I can reuse if I'm doing a Michael Jordan perspective or a Geronimo retrospective because of the timing.
So that's a good distinction to make. You're talking about a one-time sale of a hard copy versus anything that has anything to do with putting a Kansas City Star copyright on it. Right. And they're very different things. What we're going to have in our archives in a smaller regional paper such as ours compared to yours, I think is going to be very minimal. And so I think for the papers like the Star out there, it's just a different conversation than some of the huge papers.
Right, but the point is it's still an asset. If it's going to cost you $100,000, and I'm picking a nice round number because I know it's more than that by a bunch, it's going to cost you $1 million to digitize your archive. Currently, most newspapers limit access to that unless you're going through ProQuest or one of those. If someone came to you and said, we'll help you digitize what ProQuest hasn't digitized for the return for academic access to the photo archive, Kansas City Library, gives you $150,000 toward that $1 million in return for which you give them limited access for research. I don't see what the problem is. But nobody came to me and said to the Tribune, I'll give you this money, despite the fact that we looked.
All right.
What I'd like to see is, where, I want to give my picture archive to the Evansville Vandenberg Public Library where I have some reasonable expectation that it's going to be secure, and then have those same rights to republish the content as we have it, and then those images that we have determined we have the rights to resell those images to the digital images to third parties, resell them, do a revenue split, and then the library gets a cut to pay for digitization.
I'd like you to thank our panelists and our guests for today.